Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. I've been blogging about climate for 15 years, but I've never seen anything like the barrage of propaganda which is coming out right now. Mark Twain said, "Sometimes I wonder whether the world is being run by smart people who are putting us on or by imbeciles who really mean it." In this video, I'm going to be discussing some of the most ridiculous propaganda I've seen over the past week. This is from Yahoo News on August 10th. A once every 7.5 million years event is currently unfolding in Antarctica. To say unprecedented isn't strong enough. This year, during what is currently winter in Antarctica, scientists have confirmed that the ice is not reforming, leaving long stretches of the Antarctic coastline bare. Let's check that claim out by looking at the current Antarctic sea ice map from the National Snow and Ice Data Center. The Antarctic coastline is surrounded by between 200 and 1,000 miles of ice. There's one small region near the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula where there's no sea ice right now, but that area has been very cold and the ice is forming quickly. I wonder which scientists confirmed that the ice is not reforming and that there are long stretches of the Antarctic coastline which are bare. That story simply isn't true. Now let's look at their claim that their imaginary bare Antarctic coastline is a once every 7.5 million years event. Over the last 500,000 years, temperatures in Antarctica have swung several times more than 10 degrees Celsius. During the last ice age, the ice extended all the way up to South America, New Zealand, and almost to Tasmania. That was only 20,000 years ago. So to suggest that some minor variations in sea ice this winter are a 7.5 million year event is beyond farcical. The press is no longer making any attempt to be credible. Now let's look at some more dark climate comedy. 1 year ago, Democrats passed the Inflation Reduction Act. The White House described it as the most significant action Congress has taken on clean energy and climate change in the nation's history. Let's take a look at how that inflation reduction is going. Over the past 6 months, gasoline prices in the United States are up nearly 20%. That doesn't sound a lot like inflation reduction. And since Democrats passed their bill to save the climate, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have increased at a record rate. When Democrats passed their Inflation Reduction Act a year ago, they said it would cost less than $400 billion. But now the cost has tripled to more than $1.2 trillion. Barack Obama tweeted, "It's now been 1 year since POTUS signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law, lowering healthcare costs for families and investing in our future by accelerating the transition to clean energy." Skyrocketing energy prices doesn't look much like lower costs for families. And skyrocketing energy prices is exactly what Barack Obama promised 15 years ago.
Under my plan of a cap and trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket. Even regardless of what I say about whether coal is good or bad, because I'm capping greenhouse gases, coal power plants, natural gas, you name it, whatever the plants were, whatever the industry was, they would have to retrofit their operations. That will cost money. They will pass that money on to consumers.
Obama and Biden have been pulling exactly the same green energy scam for 15 years. In 2008, they promised to create 5 million new green jobs by investing $150 billion. And out of the 5 million jobs they promised, they actually only created a few thousand at a cost of more than $1 million per job. And almost all of Obama-Biden's green energy companies failed, with the most famous one being Solyndra. They're repeating the same scam 15 years later, but this time it's much more expensive. Biden was in New Mexico last week talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. The Santa Fe newspaper reported on this, saying, Joe Biden delivered a forceful speech Wednesday saying the Inflation Reduction Act will create 250 jobs in this area and tens of thousands more in rural communities across the country. Let's take a look at some of Biden's forceful speech.
My son, Bo, was one of those parachutes. He went with the fittest guy in his unit and came home and he came home but died of glioblastoma. And Representative Mark Takeda.
That doesn't look very forceful to me. It looks more like someone who has no idea what he's talking about. Biden said that the Inflation Reduction Act would create 250 jobs in New Mexico and tens of thousands more around the country. Let's be generous and assume that the Inflation Reduction Act creates 100,000 jobs. At a price tag of $1.2 trillion, that works out to more than $10 million spent per job created. Realistically, the cost per job will probably be closer to $100 million. And during that speech in New Mexico, he said, "It's called the Inflation Reduction Act. It has nothing to do with inflation." Biden and Obama are recycling the same green energy scam, only this time it's a lot more expensive. They didn't do anything to slow the growth of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It doesn't make any difference which party is in control of the White House. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere continue to grow exponentially. And as is always the case, the United Nations is in on this scam as well, saying hottest July ever signals era of global boiling has arrived. Let's take a look at what satellites observed during what the United Nations calls the hottest July ever. That doesn't look very hot. The warmest anomalies were around Antarctica, where they're in the middle of winter. Instead of temperatures being minus 30 Celsius, they are minus 27.5 Celsius. That does not sound particularly hot to me. The United Nations has been in on this scam for 35 years. In 1989, they said we only had until the year 2000 to save the planet from global warming. The United Nations has presided over dozens of climate agreements over the past 30 years, none of which have done anything to slow the growth of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The World Meteorological Organization, which is associated with the United Nations, tweeted this: "NOAA confirms it was the hottest July and likely hottest month in its 174-year record." And they said that Antarctic sea ice extent was at a record low in the middle of winter. During the summer, there's almost no sea ice around Antarctica, so I'm pretty sure they're not currently experiencing a record low. The World Meteorological Organization claimed it was the hottest July and likely hottest month in NOAA's 174-year record. And they showed this red-hot map all over the world. But 170 years ago, there was almost no temperature record outside of parts of the United States and Europe. In July 1850, it was very hot in the eastern United States, Greenland, and Western Europe. It's very likely that July 1850 was much warmer in the eastern United States and Western Europe than this year was. And given that they have very little data anywhere else, it's ridiculous to claim that this was the hottest July in 174 years. Let's take a look at NOAA's red-hot map. They show that temperatures in Central Africa were record warmest during July 2023. This is a remarkable claim because they didn't actually have any temperature data from Central Africa during July 2023. Please note, gray areas represent missing data. NOAA has no temperature data from Central Africa during July 2023, yet they claim it was the hottest on record. Satellite temperatures from Central Africa were slightly above normal. NOAA's red-hot map shows Western Australia being warmer than average during July 2023. But their actual thermometer data showed Western Australia being cooler than average. They showed the United Kingdom being warmer than average. But the UK Met Office showed the United Kingdom being quite cool during July. There's fake data all over this red-hot map from NOAA, which the World Meteorological Organization used as the basis of their propaganda. The real NOAA temperature anomalies map was not red-hot and didn't show the month as being particularly unusual, with lots of areas well below average temperatures. This map shows where NOAA has daily temperature data from 1891 to 1920. The vast majority is in the United States. They also have some from Europe and parts of Australia. There's not much over most of the rest of the world. The United States temperature record is very important, and in the United States, July afternoon temperatures were just about average since 1895. The climate emergency story is based on fake graphs, fake maps, and gross misinterpretations of what's going on in the world. This map from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace shows where climate protests are being held around the world. There's protests all over North America, South America, Western Europe, Australia, parts of Africa, and essentially none in Asia. But if we look at who's actually producing the carbon dioxide, it's Asia. CO2 emissions in Asia are skyrocketing, while they've been declining in North America and Europe for decades. Africa, South America, and Australia are essentially irrelevant. More than half of the world's existing coal-fired power plants are in China. And China is planning on using lots more coal in the future. The growth of atmospheric carbon dioxide is being controlled by Asia. But the protests aren't being held there. The protests are being held in countries which are essentially irrelevant. Everything about this claimed climate emergency appears to be a scam. Which takes me back to Mark Twain's quote. The only reason the criminals who run the world are able to get away with this scam is because they're allowed to do it by the public. Until the public starts demanding accountability, the situation is going to continue to get worse. Toto has been pulling back the curtain on the climate scam for more than 15 years. You can visit him, Kyrie, Caesar, Toki, Upala, and the 4 new puppies on the web at realclimatescience.com.